good evening, and I welcome all of you to our new episode where we are going to talk about something very specific, which will, revolve around standardization in BIM practices. And I would say before we start and go into the details, I would request Akos to, brief our audience about what is the importance of standard. Let's say people, if they just start implementing BIM, don't you think there'll be a chaos? And then if there'll be a chaos, so what is the guiding light? What can be our lighthouse, that our ship doesn't go insane in the crazy ocean of BIM? So what do you think, Akash, about this entire idea of standardization?
Oh, such a small topic that we have for today. In my personal view, standardization is important because without standards, it's really hard to scale. So imagine if there was no standardization in our industry, and not even talking about digitalization, but in AEC in general, and then you would want to build a building with pipe systems, but all of a sudden each and every pipe would be a slightly different size. You wouldn't be able to use bolts and just connect them to each other. Everything would be you would have to reinvent everything, every connection at the construction site, and it would just take forever to build anything, not to mention all the problems and cascading delays and cost effects that you would have. So now, if all these disciplines, all the pipe workers can talk to each other and know exactly what a diameter means and how they will build something, it's of course much more effective. The other day, when we were talking about different topics, a couple of episodes before, I mentioned that in many cases, a project or implementation starts with a pilot project, and typically the pilot projects are successful because the experts make it happen. There is no standardization in those cases. In many cases, they just invent something, and because of their personal knowledge, they make it work. They know how to exchange data. They know how to fix things which are broken and make it a success in the end. But the problem comes when they want to scale it. In the lack of standardization, it is not at all scalable. So all of a sudden, if multiple people, multiple experts, multiple teams would have to do the same, they just don't know how to do it because they would also invent different things. And again, in the lack of standardization, it wouldn't lead to anywhere pretty much. So after all this, I believe standardization is important for scalability to be able to speak the same language. And in particular to our industry, when we talk about ISO 19650, what I believe is that it's a huge collection of the past 30 years, let's say, what we learned about digitalization in the industry, and all those learnings being gathered into this nice piece of work, which is now ISO 19650. But that's my view on this. What do you think, Clive?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Sorry, Clive. I'll come back to you. So basically, Akash, to summarize, what you're trying to say is that either there should be a standardization for BIM practices, or companies can handle every project as a pilot project and invite consultants like me and keep paying us, and every project will be a pilot project under special guidance or experts guidance. That is what is in summary. Either there should be a standardization for BIM practice, or every project has to be guided by an expert who knows eventually the standards, who is following the standards. So I think in summary, this is what you meant.
Well, in both cases, you mentioned standards, so it assumes that we would be following some kind of standards. Having pilot projects for every project being handled as a pilot is business-wise would be suicide, I believe. So it wouldn't really help in scalability or make reasonable business decisions. So that's why we have to kind of follow certain best practices, grow them into standards, and scale them across teams.
Clive, back to you. What are your views? Sorry, I just interrupted and snatched your chance.
No worries at all. I like it, the analogy that you shared. What it reminded me of is the analogy of the railway industry. So if every country across Europe had a different way of defining what the distance between the two railway tracks would be, you would have to get off of a train at one country and then onto another train that fits the track in the next country. And that principle just sounds crazy. Yeah, why would we not standardize the distance between the two railway tracks so that we can use the same trains and the same carriages across all of the networks. And that's the same principle. So the importance of standardization in BIM is if we're creating models, we want them to be useful across boundaries, whether it's geography or whether it's disciplines. And the pipe example is a great one. Yeah, you want the pipes to be able to actually fit. You want them actually to be watertight, and you want them to be useful for the life of the building. So standardization. We've got lots of standards in our industry. So things like ISO 27001 for information security, ISO 9001 for quality, quality assurance processes. There's lots of different standards. Why do we need another one? What's the purpose of having another one specifically for information management when there's already project management standards out there? Akos, can you shed some light on that side?
Well, there are lots of standards, and actually there have been lots of standards for building information modeling as well. But what I believe is, what I see is that over time, again, BIM is not a new thing. It has been around for 30 years now, or even more. But these standards and best practices and templates were developed in geographical bubbles, meaning that in a certain location, in a certain environment, among certain teams, something was already working, and there were some kind of templates and standards. But when it comes to international working together internationally, or working together on large-scale projects and taking these global companies, then there was an absolute need of a standard that kind of goes above all these and then tries to establish one single language in the end that will help us working together. That's my view on this. What do you think?
Yep. Yeah. So we experienced exactly this, as you mentioned. 30 years of developing 3D models. You start doing them in different ways because they might be for different purposes. And we actually had some standards, the LOD standards, that actually did exactly what we just said. They sort of diverted rather than converted into a single standard. And I think that that's been useful for our industry. A lot of pain, but a lot of understanding of what to do and how not to do it, maybe, and then coming together and creating one standard that can then be useful for everyone across every continent would be very useful. What happened with the LOD spec is that we had level of detail, level of development, level of definition, level of disillusionment, a lot of different level of design, and a lot of confusion as to actually what it included. Does it include the geometry? Does it include the information? Does it include how reliable all of that is? Does it include who should do it, when they should do it, how much, and what processes they should follow? And so the ISO 19650 standards, the six in that series, help to define everything from the terminology and the frameworks to define what is required, when it's required, whom is responsible. And in order to make sure that everyone's doing it in the same way, we truly do need an agreed upon international standard. And that's what we are excited that ISO 19650 is becoming, as we see it being adopted around the world. There are some nuances to that, and we'll dig into that in a lot more detail in future episodes. But each country has a stuck on the back annex of what they believe is specific for their space, because although we would love to have one standard, there are requirements for certain things to be in certain ways in certain countries. So there is a sort of a get out clause that we'll talk about, which makes it specific for each country as well. But yeah, in overall, it would be better if we all talked about the same parties, the same people, the same disciplines in the same way. And if we understood exactly what the requirements were and how to exchange them, that would make things a lot easier for teams around the world if it was one way of doing things. So that's, yeah, definitely why we need a standard and why we need this one around information management specifically.
So you guys mentioned a couple of standards. What are your views? I mean, we need to give our audience one final definite thing, no? Which one to follow? I mean, we cannot confuse our audience more by giving them that, guys, standards are important and there are so many standards. So let's boil down to which standard you think, with your expertise, which should be followed and why?
Well, let me put it right out there that the ISO 19650, ISO 19650 has everything from the terminology to how to manage from a security perspective that information, importance of information as it gets exchanged between the parties. So definition of a standard for our industry specifically for managing information, that would be ISO 19650. And we've got a great set of resources that I'm sure that we can post links to. Everything from simplifying the workflow in a single PDF diagram to videos on every single part of it to templates inside of the Planoly app. We really do simplify that whole workflow. We even have a program to get your company certification ready in 60 days. So yeah, we can support you in
But
a lot of
Clive, sorry to interrupt. Why 19650? Why?
because it is.
I mean, I'll tell you from Indian perspective. From Indian perspective, we have Singapore very close to us, and whatever happens in Singapore, we look up to Singapore.
Yep.
So Singapore also have a standard. So why not that, and why ISO 19650 is what my actual core question is.
Because it's the first time that we've seen a standard that is related to information management / BIM actually be adopted by more than a handful of countries at the same time and with the same drive, an international standard rather than a local standard. And yeah, that's the one that I would put my money on. I think a lot of other people, if they were betting people, they would put their money on too. Akash, what do you think?
Yeah, why to choose the international standard? I think so. This is really the single one standard that is being created by, supported by the standard organization, international standard organization. So of course there are some local approaches, and even ISO has the local appendix to help the implementation and put the standard into a local environment. But those are originating from the same root. So that's the standard that is. If I just hear to our conversations listen to our conversations that we are having with the users of Planoly platform as well, from all around the world, right, from Japan to Brazil, everyone is really talking about this standard, how to implement it, how to be ready for certification. And they do need the certification in ISO 19650 because that is becoming now really the foundation of how information has to be exchanged in an AEC industry. So for information management, yeah, specifically for building information modeling, that's the standard to be followed.
Okay, I have one more, I mean, off the track question, but I think this is needed. Sorry for asking this, audience. I am going to break many hearts by asking this question. So, Akash and Clive, what software ISO 19650 talks about? Revit or ArchiCAD or Vectorworks or Allplan, or which software it talks about?
Nothing. It's about workflow. That's the principle. So it's not about using BIM software. It's about following BIM processes and making sure that those workflows are efficient and everyone's talking the same language. So whether you're using Word and Excel, or whether you're using Revit or Bentley or Synchro or Planoly or Celibri or any tool around there in the workflow, it doesn't matter. It's all about information management and the state of that information, whether it's fit for purpose and what the actual status of that information is. Is it published and authorized for use, or is it still in progress? And we will talk more and more about what those terms are, and the concept of containers and the concept of a CDE, and how that common data environment manages that information and allows you to understand what's fit for purpose and what's not, and really understand information rather than from a software perspective.
Akash, your views on the same?
Absolutely. The only thing that I would add to it is that ISO 19650 is really bringing all the parties together to speak the same language. On the other hand, there is a certain kind of learning curve to the standard, to really spend some sleepless nights understanding what the 5-6 parts talk about, and implementing it in your organization on your projects. That's a task. So even though it doesn't talk about software application, if I just talk about our own approach, what Planoly does is we are making it practical. We are putting the theoretical ISO 19650 standard in use, and helping teams to create a framework that they can start using. And in this framework, even finding some templates that ISO calls out for. And with those templates, using them in the framework, it's going to give them quite a good start to be able to implement these standards and start using them and benefiting from them on their actual projects. So what I'm trying to say is that it is not talking about software solutions. ISO 19650 is about information exchange, platform independent. Our approach in Planoly is to make it easy and make it practical and make teams help teams to start using following the standard.
Clive, in your discussion, you mentioned something about CDE. Can you just try to explain what CDE for our audience?
Sure. So the CDE is, again, it's a workflow, but that is hopefully supported by some software that helps you to store files and make them accessible based on permissions, and have a way of finding what you need. It doesn't have to be, as much as some people think it's just a one single place, it doesn't have to be one single place. It could be multiple CDEs that are connected together. But the principle is that you know what you need, where to find it, and what the status of that information is, because you're following a workflow that suits the CDE understanding from an ISO 19650 perspective, that we'll talk about in a lot more detail in later episodes as well. But essentially, it's where you find some good information, hopefully.
So basically, CDE, like ISO 19650 for BIM practices, the understanding of CDE is also not about one particular software or one particular platform or one particular evangelist. Can we say that CDE can be software vendor independent, or there need not be CDE given by the same software vendor, which is your BIM authoring tool? Can we put it in a larger context? Like, if I am using, let's say, X software, I don't need to use X CDE only.
Yeah, I mean, so within Planoly, we have something called a file manager, and file manager is a CDE, but it also will connect to other CDEs to synchronize files between them. So it's not just the single place that you might put one thing, but it could also connect into other places where those other files are and synchronize them based on those permissions, based on the security that you've set up. So it's the concept of a common data environment. Actually, we use CDE slightly differently. We call it the clever data environment at Planoly. It's all about being a little bit smarter, and there are things like the file naming convention that the ISO 19650 framework defines, especially inside of a national annex. The UK has an annex says you must name your containers of information in this way. And we automate that within Planoly's CDE, within the file manager, by concatenating metadata, meaning that if you've got a file uploaded and it's got different properties, and those properties make up the name that you need to make it, you need to define it, you don't have to write that name out. It will automatically define that based on your project standard that's been set up by the manager on your project. So there's a lot of different things that loop into this, but yeah, the concept of a CDE is that you have somewhere that you can find exactly what you need for your project, and it is secure, it's based on permissions, and it is potentially synchronizing that data between other locations, whether it's other CDEs, a Dropbox drive, that type of thing as well. It doesn't matter. It's a concept of where is your information that you really need at that point in time. You know exactly where to find it, and you can go and get it.
Akash, do you want to add something to this? I mean,
You had a question about whether we have to use a CD from the software vendor, which are supporting or giving us the other software tools as well that we are using on projects. So, of course, it couldn't work like that, because if that would mean that if you choose a certain vendor and you are only working with that, those products from the vendor, it would also mean that you would only participate in such projects which are also using, so all the teams would be using the same software tools. And of course, that is not really how real life operates or how practice works. Me personally and Planoly, we are huge supporters of Building Smart and their approach to this. So they are also introducing the OpenCDE approach, really to accelerate the working these or making these CDEs work together and just assuring seamless data exchange between them. So yeah, I cannot really add anything more than that. Maybe one more thing, there is a just kind of echo what Clive also said, is that there is a misconception of CDE is one single platform that will have to be used by everyone. Rather, CDE is in practice is a network of platforms with data exchange, and everyone accesses data as they need on the project.
Okay. So now my next question for our, Indian audience is a very, very core question. Can we define that internationally only this CDE works, or this software works, or this is the only thing that is going to work, or it is a generic concept based on ISO 19650? Do we have to narrow down our choices in terms of our preferred CD? We can have preferred CD, but is there any compulsion that this should be the software or this should be the CDE, or it is more of a generic preferred, your choice, freedom kind of an approach?
There are lots of tools out there. There are lots of tools that call themselves a CDE and maybe don't adhere to all of the steps in the workflow that are defined in ISO 19650 documentation. So definitely find something that works for you. We would recommend that you evaluate a bunch of them and find the most seamless and easy way of doing things. You might already have ways of doing that already. It might be just more manual. So instead of using metadata, you could use a folder structure and move files manually from one folder to another, which would then show their use and then maybe permission based on folders. It feels a very Windows 95 way of doing things, but that can actually solve some of those challenges if that's the approach you want to take. Inside of Planoly, we automate a lot more of that, but yeah, it's your choice.
Okay, so back to Akash. Akash, can you help the audience to understand, or rather guide the audience, how to understand ISO 19650? What are the easier, better, smarter ways, Because I think, as we discussed, that there are 6 chapters and it all sounds like very tedious kind of work. What is the easy way? What is the shortcut? In other word, we have a very peculiar word in India, we call it jugaad. So what is the jugaad to quickly, from your brain to my brain, there is a data transfer, like from your side to audience side, there is an understanding of ISO 19650. Can you throw some light on that? How can we simplify this understanding?
Sure. Well, we did that work for the audience already. So I must introduce the Planoly homepage on that one, because we have a dedicated section to ISO 19650, and we created some short videos. I believe these are just 10-minute videos introducing the concept. As I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit of reading to be done if you want to understand what ISO 19650 about is. It's a little bit more reading if you actually want to implement it in your organization as well. Now, that's something that we are just following our motto. We are making BIM simple. We also want to make BIM and ISO 19650 implementation simple. Having said that, again, on our website, you will find some short videos about the different parts of ISO 19650. You will find a process chart as well, which is as simplified as it can be, showing how information would flow between stages, between the different parties of the project and the different responsibilities. And also, on that same page, we are looking a little bit outside of our Planoly environment and having some great links to UK BIM framework and some other resources that you can use. Those are really good sources of information if you want to understand what ISO 19650 is about. For our audience, we are talking about 5 different parts of ISO 19650, probably starting 1 to 2 to 3. That would be a logical steps or logical kind of way of reading, of course. And from my perspective, those are the more important ones as well. Talking about concepts, talking about the execution phase, talking about the operational phase of assets. So those would be good readings. And when you are done with all of this, or maybe simultaneously, or maybe even before, if you want to again just start with it quickly, looking into a platform, looking into Planoly, of course, that gives you the framework and gives you some templates, I believe will accelerate the implementation and understanding what ISO 19650 is about.
Yeah, overall, it's a workflow. And if you think about that workflow, what it's trying to do is helping the owner, the client, the person that's called the appointing party, define their requirements in a more clear and a more purpose-driven fashion. And then going through a tendering process with the appointing, the lead appointed party and the appointed parties, meaning the main contractor or the architect along with their supply chain, and having them give feedback to those what's called the exchange information requirements that have been defined by the owner. So the owner says, this is what I want, this is what I need exchanged. These teams come together to respond to that. And as they respond to that, they go into a lot more detail as they get contracted. So they're selected and contracted, they are appointed. And as they go through the delivery phase, because that set of information requirements have been defined in a much clearer way, they are more able to not only carry out those activities, but also automatically check to see whether those deliverables from the supply chain meet the original requirements. And overall, this workflow is built so that it can be a workflow that can be learned from. So there are lessons learned in that workflow that can be then put back into and improve this as you define it and build it on every single project, as you use that workflow on every project. And so overall, this framework actually has 8 different steps, from helping the owner in this assessment and need phase right the way through to the delivery of information and learning outcomes at the end. And it really will say pretty much what you do today. So keep an open mind. Don't think that this is completely new. This is actually something you probably do most of these steps today. They might be called something slightly different. Just let that go. That's so that we all talk the same language. And there might be a little more structure in the definition of requirements, and there might be a little more collaboration in the definition of contracts. So overall, this is a collaborative framework that's purpose-driven, that helps define much more clearly what the owner requires, what that appointing party requires, and what the supply chain can do to deliver it, so that the outcomes are much more likely to be achieved and everyone can be paid on time and can actually deliver value in that supply chain. Let me stop there.
So they should be paid on time, like we discussed in previous episode, that they should be paid before their sweat is dried.
Dries. Yep.
Yeah. So I think now, I mean, my next question, or rather, it's a very quick input. Like, I feel that in India, in my country, we don't have any standard for BIM practice. Forget that. We don't have any CAD standard. We don't have any countrywide standard. How do you think, what is the approach, or what we should do as a bunch of professionals, how we should push this idea, or I mean, I don't know. I just want to take this ahead, in a very definite way. So can you both from your experience throw some light on that how, what is the way ahead, what is the approach, and should it come from the government requirement, or I mean we should push the government bodies, or what are your experiences?
That's a great question. Sometimes difficult, but I think that you take the lead from other countries that are doing pretty much the same, where it's both. It's a top down and bottom up. So if government should be involved and teams in industry should be involved, actually doing it together is a lot more likely that the outcome will be achieved and the desired outcome will be achieved. But the main thing that we've seen in other countries is adopt what's been put out there. It's pretty easy to say, okay, we're going to use this already defined, already crafted, already supported, already templatized, already well standardized, already well tried and tested process of implementing ISO 19650. And as you do that, there might be a need for certain requirements, certain ways of doing things, and have, as we mentioned, that national annex, which is just an appendix saying these are some of the specifics for our country. And we see that as being the first step, whether that's industry, whether that's government saying you must do this, or whether it's actually industry saying we do this and this is how we set ourselves apart from the competition. We're already seeing that in some countries. Actually, in the US, it's not a mandated standard. And actually, I sit on the National Institute of Building Sciences committees, and just in about a couple of weeks, there will be a new release of the national standards in the US, which will include workflows that support ISO 19650. So you'll see more and more countries over time, but I think that that should be led by industry as well. And we've seen that in North America, where even though it's not a mandated standard, we have teams that we work with that are becoming certified to be able to say, we do it like this. This is actually the gold standard around the world, and this is how we do it. And that's winning them more business and enhancing and making their processes more efficient. So that's how I would recommend. It's a combination of mandate and also industry saying, we want to do it in a more efficient way. We want to talk the same language. We want to have our work be internationally recognized rather than being just a local product. And that all boosts the implementation of a standard that's going to help everyone.
Absolutely. And I think so, as I mentioned earlier, talking with various teams from all around the world, I'm talking with lots of teams from India as well, and I keep on hearing that they do get this ISO certificate because of being a differentiator, because they want to be seen differently. And so now the world is becoming smaller and smaller, and as we work globally across borders, that's a badge that everyone should have and wants to have, because that allows, from the owner's perspective, an easy way of understanding the kind of the quality and the skill set of a certain team that they are working with. From the team's perspective, it's a differentiator to be bidding and winning a job. So that's what I see. Many teams, again, are already on the ISO 19650 train and being certified.
And we can get you there in 60 days. Shameless plug.
So yeah, basically no ISO to ISO in 60 days. Can we, I mean, this is like 0 to 100 in 60 days.
So what we say is that you can implement workflows and become compliant in that period of time. Yeah, it's pretty surprising, because it takes a long time. We see in so many places where companies say, I think we should do this, and it comes up in a board meeting and it gets discussed for a number of times, and maybe, over 6 months, 12 months, they say maybe somebody needs to identify what we need to do to get certified, and then that's the next year's project, and then teams will discuss it, and they'll have a committee that forms and to try and understand, and then evaluate a bunch of technology, evaluate a bunch of workflow. And then by that point, you've got a team that maybe they are the only ones that really understand it. Then they've got to disseminate to the rest of the company. They've got to train their company. They've got to get all of those steps in place. And what we do is we cut through all of that. We've done all of the hard work. We know exactly what it is that needs to occur. We've built workflows. We've built templates. We've made it simple, and we've got training to support it. So it's really providing that on a platter so that it streamlines everyone's work, and it means that they are so much more efficient in implementing all of these important workflows. So that's what we've tried to do. We think that it shouldn't be that everyone has to do it the hard way. That's what our thought is.
Yeah, so basically you have done the hard work, you have, set the platter, or rather in other words, you have the well ready. We just have to, the horse just have to come to the well and drink the water.
There is a bit more than just drinking the water, but yes, yeah, absolutely.
It's a bit more than just drinking the water. Yeah, I think this was, Akash, if you want to add something, otherwise we can end this episode, because I think it's enough for basic, simple understanding of ISO standards, and further episodes are coming, and we are going to, boil down in a very detailed manner about ISO standards with obviously both of your inputs. In fact, I got both of you on board for this podcast series for this purpose, for this ISO understanding and getting it from you both. So yeah, if you don't have anything to add, Akash, or I would ask Akash to end today's episode.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to kind of conclude on 40 minutes of discussion. But yeah, so the international standard is I believe a great achievement of the industry, because after all, it streamlines how we should execute projects, how we should communicate, how we should exchange information between the different parties, and it also combines all the learnings that we had in the past 30 years or something like that in the industry. So learning about it is a homework for everyone, and of course there are ways of accelerating this learning and making it more simple. But eventually, what ISO 19650 should be about is a simplified way, a standardized way of exchanging information, which will give more efficiency and better end results on our projects. Is it a summary? Does it sound like that?
Yeah, it sounds like a summary. So friends, stay tuned. We are going to dig down and dig deeper in this topic of ISO 19650. Which is like need of an hour. In fact, I would say that in India, we are still far behind when it comes to standardizing things and when it comes to implementing BIM. So stay tuned. We are going to talk more about how you can implement BIM, keeping ISO 19650 in mind. What are the aspects and various parameters of ISO 19650. And watch out for the YouTube video for this episode, because we are going to share important links which we all discussed about ISO 19650, Plannerly videos, and then reading material and all. So stay tuned and look for YouTube video also of the same discussion, and you will get more details. And we are now planning for our next recording and next topics. So thank you all for joining us. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.